Good afternoon, friends. In fact, I am neither a writer nor an academician in the true sense of the term. I simply interested in writing books since very early days of my life. My intention to write this book commenced when I was posted as Deputy Resident Commissioner way back in 2000-2001 at Guwahati. The time an unfortunate incident took place in Manipur, which is now known as the Great June Uprising Unity Day. The dichotomy of the issue was unification of Naga inhabited areas on one hand and the unity and the integrity of Manipur on the other. I was shocked to think that how such issue to divide Manipur crop up in the minds of the people living together for the last about 2000 years, thinking that it was a misunderstanding and it was not knowing each other due to many factors. I took to pen to bridge the gap by my writings to some extent. It may be hilarious to many, but next day I went to Historical and Antiquarian Studies Guwahati to look for materials for the book, that is the history of the people of Manipur. And that was the beginning how I wrote the book, History of the People of Manipur, and published it in 2002. Later on, I came to know that sentiment prevailed and emotion overwrought me while writing the book. So I was longing for publication of a revised edition. By the by, stock of the book was also exhausted, and some friends suggested me for publication of a second edition. But it was not easy for me to do so due to my preoccupations with other works. However, it was lucky for me to meet an old friend of mine, Dr. Malem Nitogja, while I was visiting Delhi Delhi some few months back. Usually we discuss books and society whenever we meet. In the conversations that followed, I expressed my intent to publish a revised edition of my book, History of the People of Manipur. He helped me his best to complete the book. Without his help and some other junior academicians present here, I may not be able to launch the book today. It took me 2 complete months to work on the book without any break. Even I skipped months away in many social occasions also there in Manipur during the last 2 months. Finally, the book is an attempt to collect and analyze fragments of oral and literary accounts in an attempt to bring into a single volume. This is a sum-up view about the origin, distribution, split, blending, and the emergence of communities which are believed to have constituted the natives or indigenes of Manipur. It has not been an easy attempt, as I have realized missing links and the contradictory views on several topics due to want of more detailed and authentic primary and secondary sources. I have also my own limitations in finding first-hand information on many areas. However, this book is expected to open up certain pertinent themes or issues or topics that in future others may carry out more comprehensive research, because the book is not a research work, but it is a simple narrative. Today, I am very happy and grateful to you all here for giving me company and making this event a grand success. Thank you all. Thank you.
Now the time has arrived. May I request the presidium members and daughter to please launch the book.
Thank you very much.
Now what
Thank you.
we sign the book and give
Okay,
it to you.
please sign the book. Please sign the book. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. More books. I would like to present one book to you also. Please come.
Now, I would like to call upon Sir Malim to take over the program from here.
Now I would like to call. Hello. Yes. Now I would like to call my friend and colleague Dr. Amarjit Sharma to kindly take over the mic and to review the book. Yes, it's your turn. The print cost of the book is rupees 500, but for today it's 50% discount. If you want to purchase from Europe and other countries, well, it's 25 pounds. Okay. So it's available now in the gallery outside. Maybe we can proceed it after the end of the program.
ꯑꯍꯥꯟꯕꯃꯛꯇꯗ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯑꯩꯗꯤ ꯑꯪꯀꯜꯅꯦ ꯑꯪꯀꯜ ꯊꯣꯛꯄ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯦ ꯑꯩꯒꯤ ꯏꯃꯥꯟꯅꯕꯒꯤ ꯀꯀꯥꯅꯦ ꯑꯗ ꯑꯪꯀꯜꯁꯨ ꯀꯧꯔꯦ ꯇꯥꯃꯣꯁꯨ ꯀꯧꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯦ Congratulations to Uncle Hariso Goswami, and I'm actually very close to my friend, my childhood friend, K.D. Goswami, and Tamu is, now is uncle of my friend. So congratulations again, Tamu. Thank you for inviting me to speak few things on this occasion of book release function. When Malim was contacting me for this revised editions, and I was telling Malim that, oh Malim, I also have the old editions, and And it's been there for quite a long time, and I have used it in many of my research works. And I'm sure that Tamohari Goswami's work must be referred in many of the research works by younger generations as well as older generation. And it has been very good reference book and textbook for many people who love history of Manipur, particularly on the history of the communities and origins and migration history of the people. First on the title and the history of the people of Manipur. This fascinated me a lot. And I think as a scholar, I'm so fascinated by this title. I know it's a very huge title, and Malam has told us that it covers a very broad historical period, and normally historian would go with 1-2 centuries, but I do not look in that way, and I think there is a purpose behind this book, and I think Tamo must be believe in this work that why he should write this history of people. I think history of people, normally we know when you look at the history of people since 1960s, particularly I would say that there is called Manipur Itihas or Manipur Puwari or history of Manipur, history of Assam. So for the first time I feel so fascinated by this title, at least among the scholars in that part of the world, that here is a title of history of the people. And I think there is an intention, I believe. There is a purpose why he particularly mentioned people. I think it's also because of the questions that we are raising today, because of the many concerns that we are having today. I think we have come to a time where we think that we have to bring the people, the idea of people, the notion of people at the center of discussions. And I believe in this, and I have for the last at least 5-6 years, I would say that I have also take the position that if you want to look the world, if you want to look the complexities, if you want to look about the power equations, then I think it's always to be good to begin with the people. I have worked on informal relationship. I have worked on the among the Mar people. I have worked on the not so known history of the Koibu peoples. So I have actually worked on the people whose history is lesser known. So when the title has come to my knowledge that there is a history of the people, I think definitely there is an effort. And it is reflected in Tamo's work that there is an attempt to speak history, understand history from the point of the people. There might be problems, there might be limitation. I think that's good. I think we can continue and we should appreciate, and I appreciate Tamo for beginning this kinds of discourse on people. First on this, normally another interesting thing about on history of Manipur, discussion history of Manipur, which I observe. I'm not a historian, but I work on history. What is so interesting about discussion history, particularly on Manipur, as my own direct research area, is that increasingly history has been discussed. The notion of history, the task of historian, and what history should be, what history ought to be, is discussed increasingly in public domain. And that's what I love it. And it is increasingly debated in the popular domain. And of course there are questions about what happened to trained historians. What happened to historians in the university and institute? No, there are critiques on popular history. When history is debated in public domain, the critique is that it is communalist, it is sectarian, it is emotional. I think that's okay. And but the point is that when actually bring any issue, when you bring among the people, of course there will be emotions, there will be sentimentality, there will be a lot of different kinds of identity and interest will come into play. But what is interesting is that at last people have owned it. People have owned it, and people find it is, despite of the limitation as an individual, as a human being, we have started discussing. We have to take the responsibility of what history should be, what history ought to be, what should be our historical consciousness. I know they critique that. I also aware of the danger of history in public, but I would not consider that as too much a problem. I know when once history is being debated, we know several kinds of history writing has emerged in Manipur. History of French community, history of, you can say history of Nagalim, history of Kukilim, history of Meitei Lepak. Then you will say there's some sort of lot of a violent relationship sometimes, lot of judgmental, preconceived notions are there. I feel, yes, sometimes then because of the power equation among the communities, because of the nationalist concept among the people, ethno-nationalistic tendency among the people, sometimes good history and the bad history are being decided within that power equation. I understand that. And within this history writing by at the level of ethnicity, at the level of nationalism, I also find that there are certain history which also not allowed to be written. And I find that many of the minority history, lesser known people histories are also not allowed. But what is interesting is that minority, also historically sidelined people, has come up. It is not, interestingly, thankfully to our generation, that there are a lot of educated people, there are self-conscious people. People started playing this role that I have to write it. I have actually discussed, I have written in some of my, I published my on the issue of history written by the Koibu peoples. And I've known that actually the marginalized and the what's called people who have been historically cited have actually taken of history and that they have tried to question many problems in history. So the point is that when you put the history of people at the center of discussion, I think that is a very, despite all the limitations, that is a very important journey. And Tamo has, that in the previous publication as well as this publication, I think Tamo has actually initiated a new, what Malem would say, a new historiography, I would say it's a new historical discourse in history. When you talk about people, I think there are three things normally about when you say history. When you say history of people, actually there are two things. And I would buy the opinion of a historian from Haiti. He says when you talk about history, when you talk about people, I think we're basically talking about the social cultural process. Because when you talk about history of people, we have to locate within social cultural processes. So when you talk about history, it can be discussed in three senses. One is people as an actor, people as an agent, people as a subject. I see Tamo work as a work which try to prioritize social, cultural, historical, and political process in which inter-community relations have been set. It's been stepping despite all this contestation. The larger focus of Tamo and previous work and this work is about knowing the migration pattern, the origin myth, the mythology, try to know about different histories. I think that is a history of a kind which prioritize social process, social cultural historical process. I think so. And another interesting point about people history is that because in the book itself you'll find that Tamo has talked about connected histories. Connected history. See, history of the people should be based on connected history. Connection among the community, relationship among the community at various phases of the history. And connection among various events, various moments in which people have been put. In that way, the history of Manipur, by prioritizing these people, also shows the power of discussion and connectivity. Tamo work is actually an effort to make sense of that connectivity and connection among the people. And he also expressed in terms of an organic relationship among the communities. And and he also says in terms, of course, I will this one. So I think when you see the connective history among community, so then I think Tamo history is also an effort. Is an effort to democratize history. And I think there's a serious current in going on there. Because we need to democratize history. point is, when we say people, there's effort, I think there's effort to democratize history. Because when you talk, because earlier I was talking about books like History of Manipur, History of Assam. Most of the histories are very so centralized about the people who are in power, people who are at the helms of the power. And largely history writing has ignored history from the point of view of the common people. So this is very important. There is an effort to democratize history. Whether one actually succeeded in that, that's another point. But effort to democratize, effort to tell history from the point of the people. I will just tell some few points, point by point. The question about historical significance of Manipur. You know, Tamo has raised the issue of boundary, issue of territory. Interesting word that Tamo had used. But I cannot say Tamo is not an academician. I cannot say Tamo is not a scholar. By the way, I see Tamo since long time back as a scholar. I still see you as a scholar, and I have seen your work. I'm so fascinated by your work. And you have worked a lot, you have traveled a lot, you have referred a lot of archival sources. And that is reflected in your work. And he has used this term called expressive territory and collective memory. And I was so excited by this term, by expressive territory. Of course, when Tamo raised this question about historical significance, obviously the question is how big Manipur was. How big Manipur was? What was the territory? So everyone asks this question, that how big Manipur was. And Tamo has looked to various kind of sources, and he has come to the understanding that the state, pre-colonial state, before the British arrived in 19th century, was, of course, it was an expansive state. It expanded. There was a power, state with certain kinds of military power. It was so expansive. You know, if you read the history of 17th century, 16th, 17th century, there were continuous war with our. So there were, the king was Garib Niwas, was active. It must be the British authors, the British writing. You will find that the time Garib Niwas, he was a Hindu king, but he was also expansive. So this was an expansionist state. But what is interesting about this work is that this expansionist state has an expressive territory. This was very interesting. When you say expressive territory, it means that it is not the modern sense of territory. It is not the modern sense of territory. The modern sense of sense which is based on survey, cartography, various kinds of technological driven kind of drawings of sense, which only come with British sense. So this expressive territory is what Manipur had. That territories sometimes enlarge, sometimes shrink. So there are many ups and downs, many so-called withdrawal and expansion there. So this is expressed in the sense that, of course, this kind of withdrawing and expansion also depend on the power of the state. So what is interesting? So we had a territory which is much larger than the present territory. And of course that is dependent on the movement of the power of the king. Interesting part, I think the challenge is with Tamo, because he's talking from the point of the people. I think the challenge now is the second part, that is called the collective memory. How will we understand memory if we have that history of an expansive state? And we have a history of state which, in spite of this withdrawal as an expansive, overall we had the last territorial map if we talk about British state, much larger than present Manipur. Then I think there is a notion of memory. What would be the memory of this state? Particularly by an author who takes this position of people. I think there is a challenge, Tamo, and Tamo actually, I think, is trying to tell that this memory is memory, which of course the result of the expansive state, is not necessarily the memory of the state. And this is my reading. Because I think here I find, as a political scientist, I find there are two distinctions Tamo is making. One is the state as the power, as an idea, as an object, as an entity. That is one. And state, another is a state as an experience. I think the second part is what? One, the first part is state as a military institution, state as a power, as an authority, as an administration. But the second part is state as an experience. I think over the course of this war and expansion, I think state indirectly or directly has sort of set a collective memory, which is not byproduct of the state, I would say. Because you know that over the course of war, there were a lot of relationships also established among the people, with or without the state. I think Tamo is trying to talk about, yes, people have experienced the state because of war, and through that experience, I think there has an independent relationship among the community has emerged. I think Tamo is trying to talk about that memory where people's to people relation was shaping in the midst of war and military. Because if you look at this is very interesting. If you look at the work on Africa, history of Africa, there are work like war and rebellion was a necessary part of the community making. You look about history about headhunting. The war actually, it was not just about the military, but it also has other kinds of social cultural functioning. I think Tamo is trying to talk about other sense of so-called people's memory is that expansion or that kind of phenomenon, state as a military phenomenon has actually created, I think. So then there was issue about, which bring me back about the notion of empire again, and it also brings. This is very important in particular section of the book is there. The notion of Manipuri empire, and it's also connected with the previous point I was making, and also it also connected with other points. Manipur as empire. Then it's interesting how empire works, and the way Namo also trying to discuss is the Manipur as in one sense Manipur works as imperial state at one point of time. Where how does the imperial state? Because it is what you call a centralized monarchy, and a centralized monarchy, and it's interesting how empire actually work by having a centralized monarchy, because you must be reading history of Manipur, that physically, militarily, regular mobilization of military or regular mobilization of administrative capacity of the state is physically limited to few area of Manipur. But, I mean, in terms of regular, you say division on Banan, and different kind of exercises that the Métis state had. But the interesting part of the empire is that this empire was also trying to connect with different kinds of social arrangement, different kinds of polity systems. The empire only, because empire is when the Métis state which actually comes around the area what you call Kangla or Kanglei Park or Kanglei Boom, then try to experiment with different kinds of relations with the surrounding community. And I also work on this notion of empire state. And basically what Tamo also said when actually he discussed the section on Mera Hokshongba. I wish Tamo had a bigger discussion on that, because when the moment when Mera Hokshongba come, Tamo specifically say Hokshongba. Normally some people say Hokshongba also, but I like you stick to the way we have been and the meaning that we give to the idea of how. Not how there was interesting that is that the empire state was working with the power which is centralized, but there was a lot of effort to connect with the surrounding communities and peoples. So basically, empire state, if I have to put my word, was a ceremonial state, because it was a ceremonial state. It was a ceremonial state because there are limitations of the power of the state, and this is where the limitation of the empire is where we have to begin discussing about the people history. One way how empire works by one is by military method, one is by different kind of rituals, performance, ceremony. That's why you had this history of Mera Hokchongba. On the one hand, Mera Hokchongba was an effort to build a collective, I would say, collective state where the surrounding people engages with the state. And if you look at, and Tamo's work also mentioned about Mera Hokchongba, which was a festival, which was a performance which happens in the time of Mera. Normally we have in the month of October now. In the Mera is a month in Meitei calendar. That in which the surrounding kings and the chief will come and gather in the courtyard of the palace of the king. And there are other lot of festival activities, legally, permitted certain forms of loot systems, There was an effort to build a kind of friendship relationship. But overall, while you say that this was an empire state which is trying to build up that kinds of relationship with the community. Now, if you look at this history, and I think this history of empire has been again and again revisited because of contemporary compulsions. Many contemporary compulsions there. I know Tamo's book is also set by that kind of concern. Right? Many argument that has come now from different sections of our society about the question that we were never part of this Meitei state, or we were never part of the Manipur. Actually, it is also based around this discussion on empire. Actually, so I think this notion of Manipur's empire state is a very important. I think I will not elaborate much on this issue, but I think it's important to know that the empire state, there was trying to make an effort to build relationship among the people. Yes, there is an important point which I think. How do we connect this history with that kind of imperial histories of the Meitei state? Now I think there's an effort because you know that Mera Hokchongba has been organized with a lot of enthusiasm, with a lot of meaning. I know the direction in which Mera Hokchongba right now has gone to little different way from the earlier discussion I used to observe and I used to study in 2004, 5, and 6. But I think one thing good is that in terms of people history, yes, this was a product of the imperial state history. But when people tag that history, that I don't think people take everything about the state. I think some element out from history has been taken out. What Namo was saying about collective memory. Yes, state made is present, state made effort to connect with the people through military as well as other kind of ceremony and activities. But when people tag that as our memory, I think there's a conscious effort to remove that element of the king-centric, monarchic-centric. And I know there are problems there, but there's an effort to build that. There was an element in that historical moment where there was some possibility of collective forms of relations among. I think that effort has been there, and I used to observe, and I still observe that within the Meitei scholar, Meitei activism, I think there's also effort to discuss it. One could be a center-oriented Mera Hokchongba, which should be centered in some place in Nepal, and Mera Hokchongba, which should be moving in the hill. But overall, the memory that we have of that kind of state is that a memory that should be important when it comes to intercommunity relationship. That is there. I don't know. I'm taking too much time. Huh? So I also finished.
It's quite okay. We have a couple of other ideas.
Yeah, so I can finish. So how much?
5 minutes.
Okay. Or in just wind up. Sorry, this is our habit because we used to love talking a lot. Yes. Then I think another important moment in Tamo's work is, I'll just finish in 5 minutes, maybe less than that, is that when we talk about the notion of people, I think it's important that because I think that moments of 1940s start from constitutional making exercises to Constituent Assembly as evolving of Manipur Constitution Act. I think there was also an effort to make a democratic people, notion of people, and a notion of people which was based on certain forms of democracy, certain forms of electoral voting. I think time and again, if you look at the modern history of the people of Manipur, I think we go back to this era. Because, yeah, I'm just ending. Yes, I'll just end, I think. We can. So I think 40s, let's do plus 1 point, because this 40s histories, I know still we are debating on our constitution making process and the way we make people representative. And I think that was derailed because of particular 1949 merged to India. And somewhere our own experiment or the experiment of that particular juncture in history has been stopped somewhere. It has not been able to carry it forward. And it is actually supplanted by different kind of exercises on this thing. I think we continuously have these tendencies among us, in front of us, when we actually talk about history of people. I think that would be, when we talk about history, I think this will be our continuous history, a history where we can talk about people, inter-community relationship, without being hierarchical in nature, without being repressive of one another, without. So that we are continuously looking for history of Manipur, which is democratic in nature, which also gives a sense of right, a sense of agency. So I think Amo's work is a work which we should appreciate, I think, and more debate may come later on. Thank you.